the NRL's anti-doping policy and will miss the Sharks' clash with West Tigers this week. He'll now have the opportunity to test his B sample, just to corroborate the first sample. So the NRL statement confirmed that Cherry's A sample provided in November contained some steroid type things that I'm not going to try to read out because I'll do it even.
Exogenous testosterone, androsterone, and etiocolanolone, and 5-biandrosone, 3A17BDL.
There you go.
Other
pronunciations are available, all of which are prohibited under the World Anti-Doping Agency protocols and the NRL anti-doping policy. So Bronson Cherry's been a naughty boy.
They just can't. They can't keep their noses clean, can they? One way or another. They just can't get them off the drugs. It's a young fella though, isn't he, Bronson Cherry? So,
yes.
Young fella who looked like he was up and coming. I don't know if he felt he needed a boost or was taking these things and it's a byproduct of what he thought he was taking these things for, or what have you. It seems like a long time for this to turn around though, since November, and we're now in June.
Yeah.
I know people who undertake testing might have had their laboratories busy for other reasons recently, but still, it seems like a long turnaround, doesn't it?
It does particularly because obviously in November it's an out of competition test, isn't it? He wouldn't have been. Is it? No, yeah.
It must have been.
He wasn't in any end of season stuff, was he? As far as I remember.
I don't think so.
But yeah, there's no reason for it to be the end of May when this comes out, is it? Really? You would have thought he would have become a bit more public before the start of the season, even. You would think, but yes, he's been a very silly boy, and he deserves every punishment he gets.
Yeah. So I'm sure we'll have updates on that one. And then the last sort of normal news story we're going to talk about is Huddersfield Giants have released former Fiji and Australia winger Aquila Uarte a year early from his contract. The 32-year-old who joined the Super League club in 2019 from Manly will return to Australia. Uarte's deal was due to finish at the end of the 2021 season. I think everyone's happy with this outcome, Huddersfield and the player, but everyone must feel a little bit disappointed that this didn't go a little bit better than it did. In the end, really, he only played a handful of games. He wasn't particularly electric in any of those games, and it's probably not a fitting end, assuming this might be his career.
It is a shame. This is always the inherent risk with signing an older player. Warrington, take note.
Knees and ankles, weren't it, for Uarte? It was, well, everything was shot.
Yeah. Yes. Unfortunately.
I never really heard that he was going to be coming back either, did we? It was never there was never a storyline of, Uarte is going to be back.
It seems like whatever, the operations that he had on his ankle, I think it was ankle, it was obviously never looking likely that it had been, he could get to match fitness again. It was more of a, he needs to have a functioning ankle as an adult type thing. So yeah, it's difficult. I'm sure no player wants to finish their career. He
hasn't announced his retirement, we should say, but
yeah, it might pop up in a lower league, maybe, but back home potentially. But
it's made for him to be in that Fiji New South Wales Cup squad, isn't it? Next year, that might be a nice swan song for him.
Maybe so.
Who knows? But Origin International is played for Australia and Fiji in World Cup semi-finals and that sort of level of game. He's had a great career. It just didn't pan out that way in Super League, sadly.
No.
Shall we
move on to talk about other things?
Yeah, let's move on. Now, this week in coronavirus is kind of linked storylines linked to the virus this week, rather than not all of them are necessarily because of the virus, but some of them are linked to the virus. So there's a bit of a mix here, but there's some interesting stuff to talk about.
Yep, so on the 26th, 4020 reported that the New Zealand Rugby League has announced it will enter a prepare-to-play phase for a minimum of 3 weeks ahead of a return to domestic club action. The announcement follows their new government guidelines that permit grassroots sports that include gatherings of up to 100 people. Competition will remain postponed during the prepare-to-play phase, but New Zealand Rugby League said that a further update will be delivered during the next 3 weeks, outlining a proposed return-to-play phase.
I don't know why they had to have to play so many times in that piece, but it's a good piece of reporting, and it's interesting to see, isn't it, how other places around the world are moving, and New Zealand has to be held up as one of the fine examples of dealing with this pandemic. So
yes.
All systems go there. And on the 26th, Love Rugby League reported that the RFL has confirmed the cancellation of the Champions School competitions. Another competition falling foul to the virus. The majority of the 10 competitions had reached the regional final stages when rugby league activity was suspended due to the pandemic in March. 2 sets of regional finals had been played, the boys in the North East and London and South East, but Yorkshire, North West and Cumbria finals were all postponed. The RFL has reluctantly concluded that whilst playing the regional finals may be possible, it will not be practical to stage the national finals days, which are usually held in the summer term. So that's a shame for all those kids in those competitions. I hope that they can still stay inspired and play the game through the summer anyway.
Yeah, and obviously the it's usually the Year 7 final, isn't it? That's on Challenge Cup final day.
Yeah. So
it may be that if that becomes programmed into the calendar, there may be a renewed schedule, obviously based on different year groups. But yeah, we'll see. Mm-hmm. So on the 28th of May, the biggest non-story everyone's ever talked about. So the Super League clubs voted unanimously, underline that word, unanimously, to retain the existing salary cap regulations. 12 teams run with a cap of 2.1 million per team, covering all payments for 8 key dispensations. The clubs and the RFL held discussions regarding a reduction of the cap to its 2017 level, but Super League Chief Executive Robert Elston described the unanimous vote as another example of the unity shown by our clubs. Brilliant.
And then Matthew Shaw said, "Fuck that, I'm going to report that they all fucking hated each other still." To paraphrase the League Express reporting around it. So I can't really remember how much we talked about this. We talked about it a lot on the Wigan Fan TV episode I was on the other week, but I don't know how much we've talked about it on the show.
Not very much, I don't think. It was in outline terms, and there was lots of reports about certain clubs not wanting a reduction, and certain reports of it being a bit split along expected lines.
Well, traditionally tighter in the pocket.
Yeah.
But it's one of the stories that didn't bother making the rundown in its own right, but massively influenced this decision potentially, was the players starting to finally get themselves more organised, which we've talked about over the last, so many times with all the changes that have come in the last 3 months, 2.5 months whilst we've been doing these lockdown shows. We've talked about it so many times about the players needing to get together and consolidate their own position and use some of the concessions they've made in 2020 to give themselves more power at the table, maybe a voting right in kind of negotiations and stuff, and without actually being at the table for this, the sort of campaign by the players with the blue squares and demonstrating how much they were all moving towards being in the union, and the same union this time, all together, with a massive percentage of the playing base being part of that, and them obviously being opposed to this, probably played a role, do you think? Certainly in the club owners sitting back and thinking whether this was the right move to make, and coming to that unanimous decision, however they reached it in the end?
Yeah, because one thing I do remember us talking about is the fact that it's a cap, it's not a minimum spend. So it doesn't stop any club, cutting their cloth next year or the year after. If there is a reduction in, central funding, then and you need to make changes, you can make changes.
Which we must say there's an expected £300,000 shortfall next year in some of the television distributions and that sort of stuff, which is a big, significant amount, and would actually, not quite, but have been almost all of the £400,000 that the Yorkshire clubs wanted to take off the cap. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, it's this thing, isn't it? Each club will I'm sure will be planning for various scenarios, and I'm sure the Giants are not planning to replace Akila Uate's salary. Things like that are probably, they're just sensible business decisions that you're going to be making at this time, aren't they?
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah, and you can do that within the confines of this cap just as much as you could have done if you stopped Warrington signing superstars or. Former superstars and stop Toronto having Sonny Bill Williams on their cap and stop Wigan having, I don't know, the best second rower to have played in the last 10 years and that sort of stuff. But it's sensible. We work towards increasing the cap so much in the last 5 years. We've really progressed what the clubs can do to increase their ability to hopefully retain players, but certainly treat some of the players like the superstars that they are, and for us to get to a position where we were just gonna undo some of that work, just because some clubs didn't want to potentially be left behind for a few years, it didn't seem to make sense to me in reality, because like we said last week, there's still the chance for injuries and stuff at the clubs that can spend more money that'll undo their seasons. We've seen it. We saw the Leeds team that won the treble struggle the year after.
Well, this is the thing, but I'd much rather when the clubs were getting together to have conversations, they weren't having circular conversations about potentially changing a cap. I'd rather they were talking about how they can build things to actually make it more financially viable to have a cap that's more than 2.1 million. That'd be a better use of their time rather than having a circular conversation.
Yeah, and people might want to report that it wasn't unanimous because some clubs wanted to reduce it still, but the fact that they have agreed to present this united front when it was clear that it wasn't going to be, why be acrimonious for being acrimonious' sake, I think, is kind of the thing. And sometimes when the Super League fell under the Rugby Football League more directly, I think sometimes that came out because people didn't, people wanted to push their personal agendas and stuff. And I think that's one thing Robert Elston's actually done. And people say, what's he achieved? Well, he's achieved an ability for some clubs to behave more pragmatically and less like spoiled children throwing the toys out the pram if they don't get what they want. That's what I feel has potentially happened here. But what have you? I think it's a positive reported that they've, come to this from a position of unity, even if they started the conversations from a position of disunity. Isn't that what we want in this world, to get a united front at the end?
Yes, yeah, I would say so.
Too much division.
Yes, yeah, I think that's what he's doing.
Fucking drive that division for their own paper selling.
Okay.
On the 29th of May, the National Conference League has granted amnesty. This is a really interesting story, and it is. I think this story wouldn't have come about without the coronavirus pandemic, so that's why it's fitted into this section. But the National Conference League has granted an amnesty to all players who have disciplinary bans to serve. Any player who has match suspension still to serve from last year, or indeed was awaiting a review of their disciplinary case from earlier this season, will be granted an amnesty that will enable them to play for their clubs if and when the 2020 season gets underway. The only exception will of course be any players who are serving a sine die suspension. So if you've been kicked out for good, then you ain't just going to use this as a loophole to get in. But to help clubs be able to get teams on the field, they've basically dismissed any disciplinary bans that had been in place that would have been carrying over into fixtures. I think again it's kind of a pragmatic